welcome to the Boundless Book Club. Today you've got
Annabelle,
Ahlam,
and me, Andrea, here to share some exciting books by or about people with some mad skills. We also have a guest, Flora. Flora Rees is our head of programming at the Emirates Literature Foundation. Hello and welcome, Flora.
hello, and thank you for having me.
Delighted. So people with really specialized skills are absolutely fascinating. And it's not just us saying that. Just look at the entire Marvel universe and how many times people have remade the story about the boy who got bitten by a spider and starts to develop unique skills. So we all love people with very specialized skills. But today is not about Peter Parker. Instead, we have some books that illustrate some phenomenal skills of all sorts. So not just climbing and shooting spider webs from our hands. For example, have you ever wondered how animals know where they're going with not even an address or a Google map? That's something that we're going to get to in a minute, just after this message from our sponsor.
obsession. It's in everything we do. Many people don't understand the power it has, but to us, without obsession, you're nothing more than a mug. We even obsess about the people who obsess about our coffee. When we heard 7 out of 10 people preferred our coffee, people thought we should be happy. But our pursuit of perfection said we must better it until we get a perfect 10. Because with a bit of La Dolce Vita, nobody should have to live with a mediocre coffee. Costa Coffee, obsessed with perfection every day since 1971.
That's also kind of a mad skill to make perfect coffee.
Yeah.
Before we get to the books, I want to ask you a question. If you could choose one skill to be handed to you, no effort required whatsoever, what would you choose?
I've thought about this, and I clearly have reached masses of conclusions. I think what really threw me was like having to think about no effort required, because I think anything worth, like any skill that's awesome is usually awesome because somebody's had to work really, really hard to do it. So because I was thinking, I'd just instantly be an amazing singer or a great musician or something like that. But I don't think that that's satisfying if somebody just hands it to you. So I think something that I could never achieve by learning, so like being able to hold my, like breathe underwater, something like that. Or regulate my body temperature anywhere in the world. So like in the Arctic, I would only need like a light jumper.
That's a quite good skill, I think.
Because I could still explore
like,
like a human being, but I'd have that added layer of protection.
I really like that. I'm always cold. I'd love to be able to do that.
Wow. Okay. So, yeah, I think with if it's skills, I would love to be able to play every instrument out there and be able to sing to it. I can't even play one, and I would love to have that. But if it's a superpower, I don't know, probably something like reading people's minds or time travel.
Why do you want to read minds?
I'd love to read minds, but not tell anyone that I can read their minds.
Would you be able to switch it on and off? Because it'd be quite annoying to hear people think about doing laundry.
That would be good to be able to control it.
If we're going on this sort of superpower line, rather, because I'd love to be able to play the piano and I can't, I want to be able to stop time. So you could just set aside and do what you need to do here and then just come back into the daily life that you're meant to be managing.
Genius.
That'd be amazing.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Talking
to animals. Animals would be really cool.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Do you know what would really suck though, is if you could talk to animals and then you found out that your like lovely pet actually thought you were a bit rubbish. That would be heartbreaking. Like, oh, actually, no, I don't like you. I just live here because you feed me.
But also, imagine you can talk to your dog and you've chosen that out of all the things you can choose. The world's your oyster. You say, I'd like to be able to speak to my animals.
Yeah.
And all he says day in and day out is, I'm a good boy.
I would love to speak to my tortoises. I think they seem so wise, and they wander around the garden looking they're just so sort of, you know, purposeful. I'd like to know what's in their minds.
I just feel like you could be in for such a letdown. You're hoping they're walking around thinking about Nietzsche, but maybe they're just looking for salad.
Or both.
True.
You can be, you know, you can be wise and look for salad. I mean, I didn't used to think that, but now for tortoises, that might be true. Always choose the fries, guys. Always choose the fries. Andrea, what would your skill be? Your mad skill?
Well, I kind of have skill envy now. I'd like to be able to not be cold, but I think I would like to speak all the languages.
Oh, that's a good.
I feel a bit inadequate because I only speak 2, and especially here where everybody's like, oh yes, I speak Arabic and English and also a bit of French, and also I, you know, dabble in Turkish, and by the way, I'm completely fluent in 3 other Indian languages.
Yeah. Oh, and I can like write your birthday card in hieroglyphics and.
Yes. Yeah, but you know, I think they're all pretty good.
Interesting that how, you know, a lot of the things that we want is about being able to connect with more.
Yeah.
So like languages, animals, feeling fine in any weather.
Yeah. So that you can explore everywhere, and then the stopping time so you can like do more things. I assume with the
I wonder if it's telling of anything that none of us have chosen, like I'd like to be strong enough to throw juggle asteroids or something. They're very sensible things we've chosen. Hear what mad skill you have brought for us today, Flora.
Yes, absolutely. I've been really enjoying all the different books and what you find out about what other people can do, because it's fascinating. And the book that I've chosen is Everything That Makes Us Human by Jayamohan. And what I love about this, so Jayamohan basically makes life and death decisions on a daily basis because he's a consultant paediatric neurosurgeon in a busy Oxford hospital. And he's written his memoir. It's case notes, essentially. So kind of reflection of his life, how he's got to where he is, and the patients and the stories that have brought him there. And when you mentioned we're going to be talking about mad skills, this one immediately came to mind, because he literally touches people's brains, and he has to do that in a way that doesn't do harm. You know, the first point is do no harm, and that's a really interesting thing that does come throughout this book, because he has these extraordinary skills to, you know, operate, particularly on children's brains. And of course, children are so tiny, from tiny babies up to teenagers. He'll cover whatever is needed, and he clearly will drop everything to save a child if he possibly can, of course. But there's so much thinking and imagining and creativity that also seems to go into mapping out what you're going to do once you've opened up somebody's head and you're going inside to try and solve whatever problem it is, whether it's sadly a tumor or some sort of growth that needs to be removed, or a clot, or it's putting in a shunt to drain fluid from the brain, or working with a plastic surgeon to improve children's, when children's heads, when there's a problem that needs to be fixed. And he takes you through his life from the start of, growing up in the 70s in the UK, deciding that he wants to go into medicine, and then working out where he wants to specialize. And what's so interesting is what he loves about what he does is the puzzle. It's like cryptic crosswords. It's like being Sherlock Holmes. It's like trying to work out what the problem is and how you can fix it. So that's sort of the line that he's taken, and it's just reflected right throughout the book. So it's something I've really enjoyed reading. So the cases, he takes you through various different cases that have happened to him in his life. So you see the children, and they're not always happy endings. And I think that's something it's really sad, but it's also really important that he shows that, and he shows the impact it has on him as a doctor, that he has developed these extraordinary skills. There's a lovely moment where he talks about going in to do a shunt on a baby, where they need to drain the fluid from the brain, and you put a tube right the way down into the stomach, into the bowel, so the fluid can drain away, because otherwise obviously the brain is contained and it just swells. And he says, I looked at the scans, these are 2D images I built to a 3D model in my head. and there's no map.
Wow.
It's done by touch and instinct, and he has to know where to go and where not to go. And it's these hours and hours of building up skill, of training, of going in there and making it work, under supervision. And what I love about how he talks about his life and his work is the humanity that shines through. So he's developed these skills through learning and teaching. He has a team that he clearly has the most enormous respect for. You hear about sort of superstar surgeons who have the ego the size of a house, and that's clearly not him. There's a lovely moment when he says he'd saved a child. And they said the mum and dad couldn't thank me enough. They spoke of me in front of their daughter as if I was someone just between Santa Claus and God. Now, I'm well aware in real life, I'm probably somewhere between Mr. Greedy and Mr. Grumpy, but I'd be lying if I said we didn't love getting compliments. We don't believe them, sure, but the positives are what we stash away to tide us over the next inevitable dark time around the corner. And the truth is, the little darling on the bed didn't know me from Adam. She had no idea I'd touched her brain.
Wow.
And so throughout the book, this sort of sense that what he's doing is he's treating the whole family, and sometimes the most important thing he has to do is nothing, and sometimes the most important thing he has to do is literally get inside a child's head and take out whatever is causing the problems, or do the best he can to fix it, with the knowledge that this is an incredibly serious operation, and there's no guarantee of recovery, and everybody reacts differently. So I just found the book fascinating. The cases are really interesting. I love the character, the personality that came through from Jay himself. You thought, if I was in a situation where I needed one of my children, to have an operation, I would want him to be there, taking control. So I think these sort of skills are what keep the worlds turning. You have very few people with these extremely specialized skills, but he is teaching everyone else how to do it. So he's taking his team along. He encourages his registrars to do the operations that they can do safely under supervision, and so that they can learn and bring the next generation through. And that's part of the skill, I would say, is not just what you can do, but how you use it and how you teach it to others, and how you use that to bring up the whole generation of new doctors.
Yeah, I love that you chose that, because the skill to actually heal people, that makes that person the most important person in so many people's lives when you save lives and do God's work in that way. But definitely, yeah, I changed my mind. I want to be able to cure.
Yeah, I do. And I think that's a really interesting point. And I was suddenly thinking of that when we were talking about our superpowers, that actually there's more that we could do for other people. And certainly this is, and I enjoy medical memoirs, because you learn so much about both the cases and the medicine, which is fascinating. Medicine from the 20th century onwards. The things that have been done, and look at what's happened this year with the vaccines that have been developed in such a short time, and the way that people have been able to work around the clock in order to find something that will, essentially help humanity, save humanity. So drilling right down into one person's career, or out into the kind of the wider reach of how medicine develops, I think is something fascinating for everyone. I think, really recommend that people read this book and learn a bit more about him and his career and the medicine field that he works in.
That's great. What's the structure like?
He takes you through, but the chapter heads are lovely, actually. They're all based on little phrases that have come up in his cases. So, no, first one obviously is do no harm. You've got holy moly. One of the things that I love about him is he does his operations to heavy metal music. He has to have something loud and fast playing in the background so that he can absolutely focus in on what he's doing. It's like it takes him out of that. And that's how the setup is. And that's what they do. Then, just another Saturday night, that's when he was in Glasgow, where most of the brain injuries he came from, sadly, were from assault. And he got to recognise different shapes of golf clubs, because that's the impact that they have. Everything that makes us human is the name of the book, and essentially that's what he says is, this is a major risk operation, and consequences abound for personality, language and learning. In fact, everything that makes us human. So he is so careful of where the areas in the brain are that you don't go, the things that you can't do, because the most important thing is quality of life after the operation has taken place.
Yeah.
Wow.
He's obviously got these mad skills in terms of being a surgeon, but when you were talking about the fact that, he has to treat the whole family, I'd say the other mad skill that he has, which is perhaps even trickier than the hours and hours of study is having to talk to parents about their very sick children, and how you manage expectations in that way. Like I'm just blown away by that, and let alone the ability to perform these amazing surgeries.
And that absolutely comes through the book. He actually says it takes training to dance among the brain cells, which is really a rather lovely phrase. Yes, it takes skill, a lifetime of servitude, but sometimes it can be the easy way out. And the real test is recognizing when operating is not the best option and being willing and able to share the news. Yeah. And that certainly, he shares the conversations that he's had to have. And he's a father himself. So, this all kind of relates back to his own imagination of what would I do? And how would I feel? And he clearly feels that every single one of these children is his kids. And the delight the way he describes these adorable little bundles of humanity on the table, he clearly has that huge sense of affection and understanding how important every single one of these children is.
It makes me happy to know that he's in the world and other people like him.
Definitely.
Yes. Yeah.
Was it a difficult book to read? I just have to ask, because it's such a heavy topic in many ways.
It's a fairly light touch in the writing. I mean, there's a lot of emotion in there. It's not a very long book. Each chapter has a different case and his reflections on it. I come from a medical family, so I'm quite used to reading or hearing about surgeries and so on. So for me, it was more the emotions of the parents and the children and how they were reacting, and the occasional case where it's very difficult to get through to parents, because obviously the very dark place that they are in is almost impossible to reach. So that's the most heartrending thing. But I think it comes away with an overriding sense of humanity and the importance of the work that he's doing, and I think it's well worth a read.
What mad skill have you got, Annabelle?
I'm going to start by asking you all a question, and that's, when was the last time you got in your car and you went somewhere and didn't use Google Maps for a new location?
Last time I did that, it didn't end well.
It did
not end well.
I even use Google Maps coming home because I want to know what the quickest way is. Like, I don't want to be faced with any traffic. I don't even want to waste a minute going the busy way.
I get that. So what I think you might have guessed, the mad skill that I'm talking about today is navigation. And when I say that, and anybody who knows me sees this, they're just I'm going to leave a gap because this is for them to laugh. There you go. Yes, Annabelle is talking about navigation. Move on. But the book I'm talking about is Incredible Journeys by David Barrie, exploring the wonders of animal navigation. Now, the mad skills in this is twofold. So what he's talking about, the wonders of animal navigation, is, one mad skill that the natural world has that he's in awe of. And as you read the book and he takes you through various insects and mammals that have these incredible navigational skills that depend on either the gravitational pull of the earth, the position of the sun, all of these things. So it goes through that. But then before you even begin, I'm just going to read David Barrie's biography because his life is a mad skill in itself. So at the age of 19, David crossed the Atlantic in a 35-foot yacht. He was a navigator in 1984 in the China Sea Race. He's cruised in the Hebrides, Norway, the Caribbean, and British Columbia. He's a fellow of the Royal Institute of Navigation. He also studied experimental psychology and philosophy. He has been a deckhand on a ferry, a diplomat, an intelligence analyst, an arts administrator, and campaigner. And fun bit of trivia, he's the great-great-nephew of J.M. Barrie, the famous playwright.
Is that it?
Wow.
Yeah, just that. Yeah, nothing much. He's had a fairly quiet life. Some of the scientists that he talks about in this have won an Ig Nobel Prize for their research into dung beetles. And the Ig Nobel Prize is essentially a prize that is given to science that deserves a prize, but is also funny as well. And one of my favorite descriptions is the prize ceremony usually has an actual Nobel Prize winner there in attendance. But they describe the fact that there's a 6-year-old who is called upon to basically shut up anyone who's giving a speech when they think, when that 6-year-old thinks that they've gone on too long. And one of the scientists that he talks about with the dung beetle theory was one of the few people that actually got all the way through their speech without the 6-year-old going, get off the stage. I think more prize givings should be conducted in that fashion.
Absolutely.
So I'm just going through here to try and find some of the most mind-blowing things. But you learn that even from like bacteria that have, that there are bacteria that orient themselves depending on magnetism. You know, things that you would never really have thought that you wanted to know, but the moment you read David Barrie telling you about it, you're like, oh, I absolutely can't believe that I lived without this knowledge about bacteria.
He mentions the slime, I can't remember the
slime mold.
Like slime mold, which sounds disgusting, but on a representation of the Tokyo city, and left it to do its thing of making connections with itself. And it basically recreated the Tokyo underground system.
Yeah.
Like the most efficient way to get around this city.
Like he says here about that, they are also adept at solving a problem that human designers find challenging, the construction of an efficient rail network. And it's just fascinating that, you know, you've got this slime mold that's able to do stuff that, you know, we find challenging. You've got, you know, box jellyfish, you've got bacteria, slime molds, you've got whales as well. Obviously, a lot of birds are focused on in great detail. The albatross comes up, and some other smaller birds as well. And I folded down too many pages, sadly. But one of the things that I found really interesting was, do you remember a film Apollo 13 with Tom Hanks? So he plays an astronaut called Jim Lovell, and basically there's a scene in the film where his wife is comforted by watching an old TV interview where he's recalling an experience that he had as a young naval pilot. And essentially he was trying to land on an aircraft carrier at night, and he was running out of fuel, and if he failed to locate the ship, he was going to have to ditch into essentially like the dark black ocean. And he tried to turn on the cockpit light to consult his chart. His electrical system essentially failed. He lost all his instruments, and he was in complete darkness, and thought about the fact, well, I'm going to have to ditch at any more. I'm just going to have to jump into the ocean. But then as he looked down, he saw a long glowing green carpet of bioluminescent plankton, which marked the turbulent wake of the very ship he was seeking. It was just leading me home. And if his cockpit lights had not failed, he would never have spotted it. So throughout these descriptions of the natural world, you have him constantly reminding you of stop. So this is an anecdote that was recounted by an Inuit elder in 2000, revealing how modern technology is threatening old ways. If a young person asks a GPS where a certain place is, that GPS will tell that young person. But if that young person approaches an elder and asks where that certain place is, that elder is going to go detail by detail and then describe what is before that, not necessarily where that is. Describe this comes out first, like a bay, a point, an inukshuk, and so on and so forth. As you progress, they'll tell you exactly what to expect. And a youth doesn't have time for that. He wants to know where that place is. And he talks about people who kind of went hiking or went exploring, and, the moment they stopped paying attention to where they were and picking up on those markers was the moment it all went to pieces. So yeah, I highly recommend this. There's quite a lot of information packed into this. But I mean, if you're anybody who struggles with navigation or just feels like they rely too much on Google Maps, which I think a lot of us do, then I just highly recommend the reminder to stop and look around and maybe switch it off once in a while. I will not be held responsible for people being late to their meetings.
I feel like if human beings have evolved to make life easier and easier and easier, and everything that we discover is about, how do I put the least amount of thinking or effort into this and get there quicker and faster? And that's taken away a lot of our connection with our sort of more intuitive traits that we may have evolved if we continue to live in nature or natural habitats. Or maybe the reason also that we don't know where we're going is because there's so much development all the time. You know, if you lived somewhere which hadn't changed in a very long time, I think you would probably know your way around a little bit better too.
Yeah. I think it's just being aware that, like, if you don't train those skills when you need them, you're going to have to just be super careful and aware that you don't have those skills.
True. Yeah.
And I think that phrase aware is really important, because it's so easy to become unaware these days when you've got a phone or you've got technology, and if you kind of zone in on that, and you're not looking where you're going. And I think that, as you say, Ahlam, it's really important to stop and look around and work out where we actually are.
There are those, I wanted to quote Ferris Bueller, but I'm going to move on. There are those stories of people who, like, they're driving and they can see a river, but they follow the GPS and they end up in the river. And he mentions that, and it's like, we're so reliant on it. And I'm not saying it's easy to change, but I appreciated the warning, I suppose.
And it's quite funny because we all go, sometimes Google Maps does take you in the wrong direction, and yet we still follow it, even knowing that.
Yeah.
But on that point, though, sometimes the roads are, I say sometimes, 90% of the time, the roads are complete spaghetti. So you think you're going one way, you're like, over there on the right, that's where I'm going to go. I'll turn off here. Yeah. But it'll take you in the completely opposite direction. So that's why I think, even though you kind of don't really trust Google Maps, you decide to follow it because you think maybe they know what I don't.
They have a better view from the top.
Yes.
Turn right to go left. That's the key thing.
From animals and getting lost and GPS discussions, where are we heading next?
My skill for you today is spacewalking. Not moonwalking, which is a completely different skill that we also appreciate, but actually popping out of the International Space Station and having a little stroll in space. And thankfully, you're usually connected to something, so you don't need to be able to navigate very well because you'll have like a rope to pull you back in. And I think we all have a little bit of space fever in the UAE after the Emirati astronaut went to the International Space Station last year. But I think it's absolutely mind-blowing to look up at the sky and think that there are humans out there where there is no air. So my book today is by Isabel Thomas, who's amazing, by the way, everything that she does. She's a science writer for children. The book I'm talking about today is called An Adventurer's Guide to Outer Space. And it's absolutely fascinating. And like your book, Annabelle, it's just so full of facts. And I should probably point out here that it is actually for children. But, from the age of 5 or 6 to, I'd say, about 40, 45, 50, I don't know, until you stop being interested. It's fantastic. And it does that wonderful thing that science books for children does, that it gives you lots of really interesting facts, but in a way that's really easy to digest. So it tells you all sorts of things like any good space book does. It tells you about the International Space Station. Apparently it hasn't actually left the gravity of the Earth, so it's not really in deep space. It just orbits our planet once every 90 minutes. So this is where the mad skills comes in. So if you're on the International Space Station, you're an astronaut, you live there, you will see every 24 hours, you'll see 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets, which I think if you are a normal person, that would probably drive you insane, wouldn't it? Like, you go loopy with that type of unsettling lack of day and night and, lack of gravity. And
no, it's like a rave.
Yes, sort of. Yes.
And people go up for sort of 6 months at a time, don't they? It's a long trip.
And there are only 6 people that live there at a time, so you would hope that you can get on with them.
That's another mad skill.
Definitely a mad skill. And one thing that the book does that I think is really great, on every page, it sort of focuses on a different fact. So it might be about the sun or Pluto or whatever it might be. On every page, it has a little box out that kind of says, try this. So one of the things it says is like, hold this book and wave it back and forth. And then you can feel the breeze that you're creating. If you're in space and you do that, there would be no breeze because there's no air to move back and forth, which is obvious when you think about it. But you wouldn't think about it unless someone puts that thought in your head, or at least I have never thought that before. And it's so obvious, but it's also really, really fascinating. So yes, I mean, I could tell you about all the planets, but I don't want to ruin the surprise.
There are more?
There are more. And it tells you, you know, the type of stuff that kids get really excited about. Like if you're going for a spacewalk and you're wearing this space suit and you have all the different gears, they apparently have a little bit of Velcro inside your helmet so you can kind of scratch an itch if you get an itch on your face while you're out walking.
I've always wondered how you manage that sort of thing when you're out on spacewalk for several hours.
That'd be maddening, wouldn't it? Like,
well,
do
you
anything.
just have to like get the angle right because you've got your piece of Velcro.
Brilliant.
So it's got all that.
An itch being in an environment like that, you'd be it'd be like an out of body experience that you won't really be aware of anything in your body, really.
Well, I think you probably would be aware of some things happening. You know, astronauts have to wear a nappy because they obviously can't go. So that's in there as well, which, you know, is the most delightful fact for most children, I think.
I mean, obviously.
Yes. They don't ever talk about what that feels like when you're an adult and when you're walking around in the nappy in space. But
I mean, I have so many questions. But like that's something that I've not realized till now. Like there's somebody who has done that, who's gone to the toilet floating in space. There are people who walk among us who've done that, which I think is quite cool.
I mean, I am not sure how to feel about that fact.
They're probably out of space and wearing the nappy, and then they go and they're like, well, this is cooler than I thought it was, less cool than I thought it was going to be.
I know. You're the ultimate rock star when you're an astronaut, right? And this, just to stop it from getting to your head, they're like, but also you're walking around with poo in your pants.
Yeah. It grounds you. Huh?
It does.
Grounds you.
It ties back to all these developments that we have and everything, you know, with the navigation, we use our GPS, but we're still basically the same animals that we always have been.
Yes.
That doesn't change.
No.
Which is probably a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I recommend it to everybody. I will not say anything more about this book at this point, I think, other than that, if you have any small children in your life or big children in your life who are interested in this, then it's wonderful.
So if we're going to move from like stars beyond the universe to stars that walked among us now, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. So the mad skills that I'm going to be talking about are a little bit different. I feel like there's a bit of a science theme in all of your choices, and I'm going to be speaking about Sridevi, the Eternal Screen Goddess, by Satyarth Nayak. So Sridevi, for those of you who are not huge Bollywood fans, like I am, is referred to as the first female superstar in Bollywood and someone who had a 50-year career because she started acting at the age of 4. And she was just, she was a heroine that played the lead roles to 3 generations of men, like the grandpa, the son, and the child. And sometimes that's obviously not been a good thing because when she was very young, she had to play the leading lady to much older men as a teenage actress. but she was on stage in movies from the age of 4. And earlier we were talking about wanting to speak every language. So Sridevi actually acted in Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, and Hindi. And she basically acted in languages she didn't know. And India is such a marvel, and it's there's so many languages and so many religions and so many cultures in India. Like it's an entire world on its own. And for her to appeal to every single one of these segments of the Indian market. And she's from the South, but then she was huge in the South already before going to Bollywood, and then also completely taking over Bollywood. And she was one of those incredible superstar actresses who was so beautiful and talented and a leading lady, but at the same time wasn't afraid to like make faces and play funny roles, and being a woman playing a man, or being a human playing a god, or being just acting in any language. So she was someone who could be and live any role that she was given, and just completely embodying the role that she's given, no matter what that is, and not being afraid to play sort of daring roles which challenges societal norms. And just an incredible dancer, super funny, super actress, crazy mad skills Sridevi had. And the book by Satyarth Nayak is sort of a biography of Sridevi, starting from the age of 4 in her first acting role, all the way to when 50 years later, when she actually passed away very sadly in Dubai in February of last year, when she was here for a relative's wedding. And then apparently she had low blood pressure, and sometimes she would just faint, and she had an accident and drowned in the bathtub just before getting ready, going out to dinner to Zuma with her husband. Like it was one of those really tragic moments where she passed away. And Satyarth was writing the book. I mean, he was connected with Sridevi before, and they were going to work on it together. And so she was working on her last movie, and she's like, let me just finish the film and then we'll work on the book. And then sadly she passes away, and he was left in this shocking state where he's like, he obviously adores her, had a very close relationship with her, but now he was like, okay, now I have an even greater responsibility to do her justice, write about her incredible career, which he worked on with so many directors and film Bollywood actors who had the chance to play alongside Sridevi or direct a movie for her or were close to her, and just gather all of these stories and put them into the book. And then, he also, his book obviously also had a final chapter, which it wasn't going to have before. And I really enjoyed the book. I think, if you're a Bollywood fan, if you're a Sridevi fan, it's a real treat to just relive all of those moments of her career. But I would have liked a little bit more about her personal life and her personal struggles, or who she was, what effect did it have on her not having a childhood, being on stage from the age of 4. And you can see like she had this, like, because she was a baby basically playing in films, and she was from that age programmed to be super obedient to the director. The director is like God and she does what she is told, and she kind of kept that with her into a 50-year career all the way to the end. Like she had this like complete like surrender to the director, complete surrender to the role which was programmed in her. So the effects that has on you for not having a normal life and a normal childhood, for playing romantic scenes with elder men at such a young age. And there's a scene where the first love story that she plays in, the director is like, I mean, what are you doing? Don't you know what love is? If you don't, go home and watch some movies. And she's kind of like, I've never been in love. I don't know what this is. But then to go away and come back and play it so beautifully as well. It requires mad skills.
Yeah.
So she's just one of those eternal screen goddesses, honestly, and it's the perfect title for the book.
Does she have a known surname, or is she just Sridevi?
Good point. She's kind of like Beyonce.
She has an extraordinarily expressive face, doesn't she? I mean, that's one of the things that must have led her to becoming so successful so young. You watch the clips of her movies and what she does with her eyes alone, you know, she's really, really expressive as an actress.
Yeah, I think, you know, her eyes are such a big like part of her doing a really good job in playing the roles. And one time she had to play like a blind role, and she couldn't do it well enough, you know, because it's such a big part of how she expresses herself. And you know, I look forward to asking him more questions and finding out more about Sridevi's amazing life from someone who knew her so intimately. And the book was actually you know, supported by Bonnie Kapoor, who is Sridevi's husband, and so you can see that it was kept very respectful. It was kept very much a tribute to her career, and not so much about her private life. But definitely a fascinating read for anyone who loves Bollywood and Sridevi, the queen.
If you're a Bollywood newbie, will this book be enlightening or confusing?
Can I answer that one?
Did you try to read it, Flora?
I would say enlightening. Yeah, I found it really, really interesting. I grew up in the UK, not in a culture saturated by Bollywood, which I know, you know, here in the UAE has been very much part of life for a very long time. And so I was reading the book. It tells you a lot about the history of, you know, how the film's progressed and what her part was in it. And I had to keep going to YouTube to see clips and see what this different role was and what this different part was. So I think it's enlightening.
Yeah, and you know, there are moments where even being the huge star that she is, she still had to deal with some of the same issues that women deal with all over the world, even at her level, you know, having to deal with men making passes at her and then taking it hardly when she turns them down, and kind of messing with her and messing with her career. And so there's definitely moments which humanize her in that way, and you really feel for her. Yeah, it's a great book. Definitely recommend it.
Sounds really interesting. It's what a shame for him to not get her actual voice in it the way it was planned.
Yeah, definitely. And he found some rare collections of photos of her from the 80s and 90s, and 2 really beautiful photos are used for the back and front covers of the book, and she was just gorgeous.
My dad was in a Bollywood movie.
Really?
I love this story.
He was? Which one?
We have no idea. He was working in India, in Andhra Pradesh, and he was staying in a hotel, like just working in construction, and he walked out of the lift, and he was just an extra. Like, they basically said, "Sir, can you go back and do that again?" And so he did. And he has no idea to this day, like somewhere there is a Bollywood film with like my dad, very young,
walking out of a lift
with a briefcase. And
cool.
It's always going to be a mystery because there's so many. Like, I don't think I'll ever get to the bottom of it. But that will be
forever. I'm going to be paying attention to white men coming out of elevators in Bollywood movies.
Thank you so much.
Like,
do let me know.
Is that one him? Is that him? Is that him?
Do let me know if you find anything. I feel like it's one of those things that I'll like discover when I'm in my 80s and in an old people's home. I'll be like, there he is.
That is so cool. I mean, anytime I watch a Bollywood film, I'm like, how cool is it to be on this set? Because I actually was super lucky, and I got to work on some of the Bollywood shoots that we did here in Dubai in the past, and it's just always this like larger than life kind of set, and it's just so fun to be on the set, and for every single person that's on there, it's just such an experience, you know, breaking out into color and dresses and dancing and music, and everything feels like a Disney film, really.
It sounds exhausting. Thanks for tuning in to the Boundless Book Club. Thank you, Flora, for joining us today. You are going to be very busy in the coming weeks with the Emirates Airline Festival of Literature and all the authors who are taking part. We're taking a very short break, and then we'll be back with more amazing books you need in your life. We have had some great suggestions for topics to tackle, and if you've sent one in, we will get to it. If you do want to suggest a topic or ask a question, you can send us an email on comms@emirateslitfest.com. Until next time, stay safe and read the books.